Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. Chapter 2, Part 2. That was 5 weeks ago. Sir, yes. As soon as Katerina Ivanova and Sonia heard of it, mercy on us. It was as though I stepped into the kingdom of heaven. It used to be, you can lie like a beast, nothing but abuse. Now they were walking on tiptoe, hushing the children. Semyon Zaharovich is tired. With his work at the office, he's resting. Shh. They made me coffee before I went to work and boiled cream for me. They began to get real cream for me. Do you hear that? And how they managed to get together the money for a decent outfit. 11 rubles, 50 kopecks. I can't guess. Boots, cotton, shirts front. Most magnificent, a uniform. They got up all in splendid style for 11 rubles and a half. The first morning I came back from the office, I found Katerina Ivanova had cooked 2 courses for dinner, soup and salt meat with horseradish, which we had never dreamed of till then. She had not any dresses, none at all, but she got herself up as though she were going on a visit, and not that she'd anything to do with it. She smartened herself up with nothing at all. She'd done her hair nicely, put on a clean collar of some sorts, cuffs, and there she was, quite a different person. She was younger and better looking. Sonia, my little darling, had only helped with money for the time, she said. It won't do for me to come and see you often. After dark, maybe, when no one can see. Do you hear? Do you hear? I lay down for a nap after dinner, and what do you think? Though Katerina Ivanova had quarreled to the last degree with our landlady Amalia Fyodorovna only a week before, she could not resist then asking her in to coffee. For 2 hours they were sitting whispering together. Semyon Zaharovich is in the service again now, and receiving a salary, says she. And he went himself to His Excellency, and His Excellency himself came out to him, made all the others wait, and led Semyon Zaharovich by the hand before everybody into his study. Do you hear? Do you hear? To be sure, says he. Semyon Zaharovich, remembering your past services, says he, and in spite of your propensity to that foolish weakness, since you promised now, and since moreover we've got on badly without you. Do you hear? Do you hear? And so, says he, I rely now on your word as a gentleman. And all that, let me tell you, she has simply made up for herself, and not simply out of wantonness. For the sake of bragging, no, she believes it all herself. She amuses herself with her own fantasies. Upon my word, she does. And I don't blame her for it. No, I don't blame her. 6 days ago, when I brought her my first earnings in full, 23 rubles, 40 kopecks altogether, she called me her poppet. Poppet, said she, my little poppet. And when we were by ourselves, you understand, you would not think me a beauty. You would not think much of me as a husband, would you? Well, she pinched my cheek. My little poppet, said she. Marmeladov broke off, tried to smile, but suddenly his chin began to twitch. He controlled himself, however. The tavern, the degraded appearance of the man, the 5 nights in the hay barge, and the pot of spirits, and yet this poignant love for his wife and children bewildered his listener. Raskolnikov listened intently, but with a sick sensation. He felt vexed that he had come here. Honored sir, cried Marmeladov, recovering himself. Oh, sir, perhaps this all seems a laughing matter to you, as it does to others. And perhaps I am only worrying you with the stupidity of all the trivial details of my home life. But it is not a laughing matter to me, for I can feel it all, and the whole of that heavenly day of my life, and the whole of that evening. I passed in fleeting dreams of how I would arrange it all, and how I would dress all the children, and how I should give her rest, and how I should rescue my own daughter from dishonor and restore her to the bosom of her family, and a great deal more. Quite excusable, sir. Well then, sir. Marmeladov suddenly gave a sort of start, raised his head, and gazed intently at his listener. Well, on the very next day, after all those dreams, that is to say, exactly 5 days ago, in the evening, by a cunning trick, like a thief in the night, I stole from Katerina Ivanovna the key of her box, took out what was left of my earnings. How much it was, I have forgotten. And now look at me, all of you. It's the 5th day since I left home, and they are looking for me there. And it's the end of my employment, and my uniform is lying in the tavern on the Egyptian bridge. I exchanged it for the garments I have on, and it's the end of everything. Marmeladov struck his forehead with his fist, clenched his teeth, closed his eyes, and leaned heavily with his elbow on the table. But a minute later his face suddenly changed, and with a certain assumed slyness and affectation of bravado, he glanced at Raskolnikov, laughed, and said, "This morning I went to see Sonia. I went to ask her for a pick-me-up. He. You don't say she gave it to you," cried one of the newcomers. He shouted the words and went off into a faw. This very quart was brought with her money, Marmeladov declared, addressing himself exclusively to Raskolnikov. 30 kopecks she gave me with her own hands, her last, all she had, as I saw. She had nothing. She only looked at me without a word. Not on earth, but up yonder. They grieve over men. They weep, but they don't blame them. They don't blame them. But it hurts more. It hurts more when they don't blame them. 30 kopecks, yes. And maybe she needs them now. Ugh. What do you think, my dear sir? For now she's got to keep up her appearance. It costs money, that smartness, that special smartness, you know. Do you understand? And there's pomatum too, you see. She must have things, petticoats, starched ones, shoes too, real jaunty ones, to show off her foot, and when she has to step over a puddle. Do you understand, sir? Do you understand what all that smartness means? And here I, her own father, here I took 30 kopecks of that money for a drink, and I'm drinking it, and I have already drunk it. Come, who will have pity on a man like me? Eh? Are you sorry for me, sir, or not? Tell me, sir, are you sorry for me or not? He would have filled his glass, but there was no drink left. The pot was empty. What are you to be pitied for? Shouted the tavern keeper, who was again near them. Shouts of laughter and even oaths followed. The laughter and the oaths came from those who were listening and also from those who had heard nothing but were simply looking at the figure of the discharged government clerk. To be pitied? Why am I to be pitied? Marmeladov suddenly declaimed, standing up with his arm outstretched, as though he had been only waiting for that question. Why am I to be pitied? Am I to be pitied? You say. Yes, there's nothing to pity me for. I ought to be crucified. Crucified on a cross, not pitied. Crucify me. Oh, judge, crucify me, but pity me. And then I will go off myself to be crucified, for it's not merrymaking I seek, but tears and tribulation. Do you suppose that sell, that this pint of yours has been sweet on me? It was tribulation I sought at the bottom of it, tears and tribulation, and I found it, and I have tasted it. But he will pity us, who has had pity on all men, who has understood all men and all things. He is the one. He too is the judge. He will come in that day and he will ask, where is the daughter who gave herself for her cross? Consumptive stepmother, and for the little children of another. Where is the daughter who had pity upon the filthy drunkard, her earthly father, undismayed by his beastliness? And he will say, come to me. I have already forgiven thee once. I have forgiven thee once. Thy sins, which are many, are forgiven thee, for thou hast loved much. And he will forgive my Sonia. He will forgive, I know it. I felt it in my heart when I was with her just now. And he will judge and he will forgive all, the good and the evil, the wise and the meek. And when he has done with all of them, then he will summon us. You too come forth. He will say, come forth, ye drunkards, come forth, ye weak ones, come forth, ye children of shame. And we shall all come forth without shame, and shall stand before him. And he will say unto us, ye are swine, made in the image of the beast, and with his mark. But come ye also. And the wise ones and those of understanding will say, O Lord, why dost thou receive these men? And he will say, this is why I deceived them. O ye wise, this is why I deceived them. O ye of understanding, that not one of them believed himself to be worthy of this. And he will hold out his hands to us, and we shall fall down before him, and we shall weep, and we shall understand all things. Then we shall understand all, and all will understand. Katerina Ivanova, even, she will understand. Lord, thy kingdom come. And he sank down on the bench, exhausted and helpless, looking at no one, apparently oblivious of his surroundings and plunged in deep thought. His words had created a certain impression. There was a moment of silence, but soon laughter and oaths were heard again. That's his notion. Talked himself silly. A fine clerk he is. And so on and so on. Let us go, sir, said Marmeladov, all at once raising his head and addressing Raskolnikov. Come along with me. Kozel's house, looking into the yard. I am going to Katerina Ivanova. Time I did. Raskolnikov had for some time been wanting to go, and he had meant to help him. Marmeladov was much unsteadier on his legs than in his speech and leaned heavily on the young man. They had 200 or 300 paces to go. The drunken man was more and more overcome by dismay and confusion as they drew nearer the house. It's not Katerina Ivanova I'm afraid of now, he muttered in agitation, and that she will begin pulling my hair. What does my hair matter? Bother my hair. That's what I said. Indeed, it will be better if she does begin pulling it. That's not what I'm afraid of. It's her eyes I'm afraid of. Yes, her eyes. The red on her cheeks, too, frightens me. And her breathing, too. Have you noticed how people in that disease breathe when they are excited? I am frightened of the children's crying, too. For if Sonia had not taken them food, I don't know what's happened. I don't know. But blows I am not afraid of. No, sir, that such blows are not pain to me, but even an enjoyment. In fact, I can't get on without it. It's better so. Let her strike me. It relieves her heart. It's better so. There's the house of Kozel, the cabinet maker, a German, well-to-do. Lead the way. They went in from the yard and up to the fourth story. The staircase got darker and darker as they went up. It was nearly 11 o'clock, and although in summer in Petersburg there is no real night, yet it was quite dark at the top of the stairs. A grimy little door at the very top of the stairs stood ajar. A very poor-looking room about 10 paces long was lighted up by a candle end. The whole of it was visible from the entrance. It was all in disorder, littered up with rags of all sorts, especially children's garments. Across the furthest corner was stretched a ragged sheet. Behind it probably was the bed. There was nothing in the room except two chairs and a sofa covered with American leather, full of holes, before which stood an old deal kitchen table, unpainted and uncovered. At the edge of the table stood a smoldering tallow candle in an iron candlestick. It appeared that the family had a room to themselves, not part of a room, but their own room was practically a passage. The door leading to the other rooms, or rather cupboards, into which Amalia Weeksel's flat was divided, stood half open, and there was shouting, uproar, and laughter within. People seemed to be playing cards and drinking tea there. Words of the most unceremonious kind flew out from time to time. Raskolnikov recognized Katerina Ivanovna at once. She was rather tall, slim, and graceful woman, terribly emaciated, with magnificent dark brown hair and with a hectic flush in her cheeks. She was pacing up and down in her little room, pressing her hands against her chest. Her lips were parched, and her breathing came in nervous, broken gasps. Her eyes glittered as in fever and looked about with a harsh, immovable stare. And that consumptive and excited face with the last flickering light of the candle end playing upon it made a sickening impression. She seemed to Raskolnikov about 30 years old and was certainly a strange wife for Marmeladov. She had not heard them and did not notice them coming in. She seemed to be lost in thought, hearing and seeing nothing. The room was closed, but she had not opened the window. A stench rose from the staircase, but the door on to the stairs was not closed. From the inner rooms, clouds of tobacco smoke floated in. She kept coughing, but did not close the door. The youngest child, a girl of 6, was asleep, sitting curled up on the floor with her head on the sofa. A boy a year older stood crying and shaking in the corner. Probably he had just had a beating. Besides him stood a girl of 9 years old, tall and thin, wearing a thin and ragged chemise with an ancient cashmere fleece flung over her bare shoulders, long outgrown and barely reaching her knees. Her arm, as thin as a stick, was round her brother's neck. She was trying to comfort him, whispering something to him and doing all she could to keep him from whimpering again. At the same time, her large dark eyes, which looked larger still from the thinness of her frightened face, were watching her mother with alarm. Marmeladov did not enter the door but dropped on his knees in the very doorway, pushing Raskolnikov in front of him. The woman, seeing a stranger, stopped indifferently facing him, coming to herself for a moment and apparently wondering what he had come for. But evidently she had decided that he was going into the next room, as he had to pass through hers to get there. Taking no further notice of him, she walked towards the outer door to close it, and uttered a sudden scream on seeing her husband on the knees in the doorway. Ah! She cried out in frenzy. He has come back! The criminal! The monster! And where is the money? What's in your pocket? Show me. What's in your pocket? And your clothes are different. Where are your clothes? Where is the money? Speak. And she fell to searching him. Marmeladov submissively and obediently held up both arms to facilitate the search. Not a farthing was there. Where is the money? She cried. Mercy on us! Can he have drunk it all? There were 12 silver rubles left in the chest. And in a fury, she seized him by the hair and dragged him into the room. Marmeladov seconded her efforts by meekly crawling along on his knees. And this is a consolation to me. This does not hurt me, but is a positive consolation. Honored, sir, he called out, shaking to and fro by his hair, and even once striking the ground with his forehead. The child asleep on the floor woke up and began to cry. The boy in the corner, losing all control, began trembling and screaming and rushed to his sister in a violent terror, almost in a fit. The eldest girl was shaking like a leaf. He's drunk it. He's drunk it all. The poor woman screamed in despair. And his clothes are gone. And they are hungry, hungry. And wringing her hands, she pointed to the children. Oh, accursed life! And you? Are you not ashamed? She pounced all at once upon Raskolnikov. From the tavern. Have you been drinking with him? You have been drinking with him, too. Go away. The young man was hastening away without uttering a word. The inner door was thrown wide open and inquisitive faces were peering in at it. Coarse, laughing faces with pipes and cigarettes and heads wearing caps thrust themselves in at the doorway. Further in could be seen figures in dressing gowns flung open, in costumes of unseemly scantiness, some of them with cards in their hands. They were particularly diverted when Marmeladov, dragged about by his hair, shouted that it was a consolation to him. They even began to come into the room. At last, a sinister shrill outcry was heard. This came from Amalia Lipoviksel herself, pushing her way amongst them and trying to restore order after her own fashion and, for the 100th time, to frighten the poor woman by ordering her with coarse abuse to clear out of the room next day. As he went out, Raskolnikov had time to put his hand into his pocket, to snatch up the coppers he had received in exchange for his rouble in the tavern, and to lay them unnoticed in the window. Afterwards, on the stairs, he changed his mind and would have gone back. What a stupid thing I've done, he thought to himself. They have Sonia, and I want it myself. But reflecting that it would be impossible to take it back now, and that in any case he would not have taken it, he dismissed it with a wave of the hand and went back to his lodgings. Sonia wants pomatum too, he said as he walked along the street, and he laughed malignantly. Such smartness costs money. And maybe Sonia herself would be bankrupt today. For there is always a risk hunting big game, digging for gold. Then they would be all without a crust tomorrow, except for my money. Hurrah for Sonia! What a mine they've dug there. And they're making the most of it. Yes, they're making the most of it. They've wept over it and grown used to it. Man grows used to everything, the scoundrel. He sank into thought. And what if I'm wrong? He cried suddenly after a moment's thought. What if man is not really a scoundrel? Man, in general, I mean, the whole race of mankind. Then all the rest is prejudice, simply artificial terrors, and there are no barriers, and it's all as it should be. Chapter 3. He woke up late the next day after a broken sleep, but his sleep had not refreshed him. He woke up bilious, irritable, ill tempered, and looked with hatred at his room. It was a tiny cupboard of a room about 6 paces in length. It had a poverty stricken appearance with its dusty yellow paper peeling off the walls, and it was so low pitched that a man of more than average height was ill at ease in it and felt every moment that he would knock his head against the ceiling. The furniture was in keeping with the room. There were 3 old chairs, rather rickety, a painted table in the corner on which lay a few manuscripts and books. The dust that lay thick upon them showed that they had been long untouched. A big clumsy sofa occupied almost the whole of one wall and half the floor space of the room. It was once covered with prints, but was now in rags and served Raskolnikov as a bed. Often he went to sleep on it as he was, without undressing, without sheets, wrapped in his old student's overcoat, with his head on one little pillow, under which he heaped up all the linen he had, clean and dirty, by the way of a bolster. A little table stood in front of the sofa. It would have been difficult to sink to a lower ebb of disorder, but to Raskolnikov, in his present state of mind, this was positively agreeable. He had got completely away from everyone, like a tortoise in its shell, and even the sight of a servant girl who had to wait upon him and looked sometimes into his room made him writhe with nervous irritation. He was in the condition that overtakes some monomaniacs, entirely concentrated upon one thing. His landlady had for the last fortnight given up sending him in meals, and he had not yet thought of postulating with her, though he went without his dinner. Nastasia, the cook and only servant, was rather pleased at the lodger's mood and had entirely given up sweeping and doing his room. Only once a week or so she would stray into his room with a broom. She woke him up that day. Get up, why are you asleep? She called to him. It's past 9. I have brought you some tea. Will you have a cup? I should think you are fairly starving. Raskolnikov opened his eyes at and recognized Nastasia. From the landlady, eh? He asked slowly and with a sickly face sitting up on the sofa. From the landlady indeed. She set before him her own cracked teapot full of weak and stale tea and laid yet 2 yellow lumps of sugar by the side of it. Here, Nastasia, take it please, he said, fumbling in his pocket. He had slept in his clothes, and taking out a handful of coppers, run and buy me a loaf, and get me a little sausage, the cheapest, at the pork butcher's. The loaf I'll fetch you this very minute, but wouldn't you rather have some cabbage soup instead of sausage? It's capital soup, yesterday's. I saved it for you yesterday, but you came in late. It's fine soup. When the soup had been brought and he had begun upon it, Nastasia sat down beside him on the sofa and began chatting. She was a country peasant woman and a very talkative one. Skiva Flovna means to complain to the police about you, she said. He scowled. To the police? What does she want? You don't pay her money and you won't turn out of the room. That's what she wants, to be sure. The devil, that's the last straw, he muttered, grinding his teeth. No, that would not suit me. Just now. She is a fool, he added aloud. I'll go and talk to her today. Fool, she is, and no mistake, just as I am. But why, if you are so clever, do you lie here like a sack and have nothing to show for it? One time you used to go out, you say, to teach children. But why is it you do nothing now? I'm doing. Raskolnikov began sullenly and reluctantly. What are you doing? Work. What sort of work? I'm thinking, he answered seriously after a pause. Tasia was overcome with a fit of laughter. She was given to laughter, and when anything amused her, she laughed inaudibly, quivering and shaking all over till she felt ill. And have you made much money by your thinking? She managed to articulate at last. One can't go out to give lessons without boots, and I'm sick of it. Don't quarrel with your bread and butter. They pay so little for the lessons. What's the use of a few coppers? He answered reluctantly, as though replying to his own thought. And you want to get a fortune all at once? He looked at her strangely. Yes, I want a fortune, he answered firmly after a brief pause. Don't be in such a hurry. You quite frighten me. Shall I get you the loaf or not? As you please. Ah, I forgot. A letter came for you yesterday when you were out. A letter? For me? From whom? I can't say. I gave 3 kopecks of my own to the postman for it. Will you pay me back? Then bring it to me. For God's sake, bring it, cried Raskolnikov, greatly excited. Good God!